Mick, how did you find carnivore?
Hey Dave, thanks for having me back. Just for those who haven't seen my previous interview, uh, I started carnivore about 4 years ago. Prior to that, I was 8 months or so in low carb keto and working through a journey of improvement. During that process, I was feeling on top of the world. It was about April 23, and getting some routine blood tests done and whatever else, decided to do a CAC. Sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole. The CAC came back and said I wasn't doing as good as I thought I was. So it put me in 95th percentile on the bad end of that, as far as my age group and population, which, with my engineering background, led me down a path of trying to fix it, find out more, understand what's going on, and then trying to fix it. So 4 years of carnivore, and I was already 2 years into carnivore by the time I came across the CAC problem. So, just to give you a bit of background, fairly strict. When I say fairly strict carnivore, I do have coffee, but for the last 2 years, no digression, no alcohol. Just keep it fairly clean. Steak, eggs, some dairy, sardines, a bit of salami here and there, but very minimal of that. So I suppose just picking up from where we left off on the other video, Dave, and there were some queries, and for those that haven't seen it, it was, I think we recorded on the 10th of February 25. I remember that as my wife's birthday, so I can't forget those things. So we talked about what I've done in terms of reversing my calcium score, and not just the calcium score, but particularly the volume of my plaque and the mass of plaque. So in the last 12 months, from December 23 to December 24, I dropped all three of those figures by 19 to 20%. Independent measures, all done on the same machine and at the same lab, trying to be consistent. Noting that while we haven't really talked about it, there's been a recent drop of information on the Dave Feldman study around calcification and how progression of plaque happens. The CAC measures hard plaque, so I've got no data at this point in time on soft plaque, and that study actually supports the fact that hard plaque didn't get worse for the majority of people. All that noise that we're seeing in the media there is actually around the soft plaque measures, which is still relatively specific. Now, it takes us down a path of using that as a bit of a segue to a discussion, Dave. The soft plaque is typically coming about from some form of insult, and I mentioned insults in a previous discussion. Insults are things that aggravate or create problems in our arteries, and there could be a multitude of things, and we'll get into that in a sec. But looking at it, our typical scans and so on don't measure those insults unless you go down the CTCA, which might be able to tell you some things. And a lot of the Feldman work used the clearly artificial intelligence assessment that gave a whole new level of data in assessment. So that's a good thing. I think that data, when you actually look at what he's published, will provide more insight into our lifestyle and what we do. But as prior to that information, everything is based on your CAC and your CTCA. So what I'd like to talk about today, to following on from the previous discussion, is there were quite a few requests around, well, tell me what you do, tell me what supplements you're taking, tell me how you're approaching things. So rather than just purely saying, here is an answer, what I'd like to do is talk through some of those, the journey I've been on to unpack that and what that looks like, and how people can actually help themselves as they go through their own journey. Yeah, so if that helps. I might see if I can quickly share screen, Dave. So what I've got on the screen here is particularly thanks to Patrick Toit, who you had on the the show a few weeks ago, Patrick developed this, and he calls it Gina the Dragon. And what it actually talks to is the insults that can cause our heart issues. Okay, so there are many insults to the arteries are multifactorial, and one of the things that every time I see these forums and posts about LDL and cholesterol, I don't discount personally what contributions that can make, but it's definitely not the only one. Okay, so this is where I think the mindset that there's only one situation where one thing contributes to the problem is where we fall over as a society. It's multifactorial. I'm going to run around this sheet, and hopefully this gives people a bit of a guide as to where to start looking for their own purposes and understanding where they sit with some of these things and why are these important. So starting at the top left, we've got low K, and K in this case isn't purely vitamin K1 or K2 or others. It's a combination of K, and there's a reason why K is important on many levels as a collective. And we'll talk a little bit to that in the one or two slides ahead. Pheto A needs to be in the right range. Pheto A is important because that's actually what pulls the calcium out of the lesions and the calcification. ApoE status. So you may have come across ApoE 2, 3, 4. In particular, some people with ApoE 4 have a much slower turnover of their HDL and LDL, so it hangs around a lot longer. So I mentioned a second ago, I'm not a staunch advocate of LDL and HDL doesn't matter. I think there is some context where it does. Obviously, it's trying to do things around that to make sure we can manage that. But the ApoE4 people need to take some extra consideration into this. Insulin and glucose, which is what people generally point to, saying you're insulin resistant, that's the root cause of all calcification. It's not. It is a big one, but it's not the only one. So this is a key point, I suppose, that I carry on with. External factors, whether it's smoking, statins, warfarin, taking calcium supplements, phosphorus, all of these things can actually have an adverse effect on our bodies. So something to consider. Whether you suffer with autoimmune issues, I personally have psoriasis, have had since I was the age of about 13. That's a gut issue. Whether that's antagonizing calcification, it's been linked to heart disease. From the studies that I've read, it indicates a 5 to 10 year reduction in lifespan based on having psoriasis, as an example. Many others in that process as well. Hormone imbalances, having the right amount of your hormones to let the body do what it needs to do, is another area to explore and check to see whether you've got any challenges there. Surface chemistry of LDL and HDL and the geometry. So we've heard a lot of the rhetoric around the ApoB and LP little a and all of those sorts of things. That's real, and there is some reference to that. Whether it's causal or not, that's a whole different discussion. But LDL and HDL surface chemistry is key, and as we know, they're transport mechanisms, and we'll talk a little bit about those in particular when we talk about a toolkit in a few minutes, and why they're important and how we discuss that further. Having the right amino acids is key. If we've got an imbalance there, that's going to come in. Low vitamin C, and while we're on the carnivore diet, we say we don't need as much vitamin C, and I would stand with that. Having said that, we also need vitamin C to ensure that collagen synthesis happens and is sufficient to allow arterial repair. If for some reason that C is blocked, whether it's via the GLUT4 receptor and carbohydrates are in the loop, or for other reasons why that's not being sufficiently absorbed, that could cause us problems. So keep that one in mind as well. And again, I think it's important that we don't get so single-minded in our approach that we think, well, none of this is relevant because I'm doing carnivore on its own. I think it's important we have an open mind on how our bodies are actually reacting. Invasive critters, whether that's various other bacteria or parasites or things that have been put into our bodies that shouldn't be there, and the body's trying to react to them to try to defend. And there's a whole mechanism around immunology and how the body's defense mechanisms go into that. Every time some of that happens, that causes inflammation and creates this cycle of repair that needs to happen. So we need to understand what these insults are there. Gut bacteria, having not enough of the good stuff, or some adaptations or movement of the bad stuff. We've heard of a lot of people with SIBO and various other gut bacteria issues, leaky gut, many other bits and pieces there. So understanding if that's causing the individual problem. Mechanical picks up things like blood pressure, maybe sickle cell disease, where we've got some abrasion happening with cells or other things happening in the mechanics of the arterial flow that could cause us problems. A bad diet and bad fats, we've talked in the past around the omega-3 and omega-6 balance. If we're heavy on the omega-6 fats, what does that do for us? There's plenty of stuff out there in our space around why we want to avoid an incorrect balance there. Trace metals, whether it's heavy metals, mercury, aluminium, and others, making it into our body. How do we detox from them? Low magnesium, again, we need a certain amount of magnesium in our blood. That helps to loosen up calcium so it can be transported. But if we're low, then it gets prioritized to certain parts of the function. All of these extra bits and pieces that we take into our body, or the body needs, are prioritized from a survival mode right through to, once there is sufficient of everything, then all the various aspects get addressed. Ensuring that we've got a T3 in the right range. When it's out of range, we actually minimize the ability to trigger certain functions that need to happen. And then having low vitamin D and CoQ10. Vitamin D is a key aspect that is looked for as one of the first steps in some of the healing process. And CoQ10, as we get older, we know the body generates less and less CoQ10, and statins have a further impact on the ability to convert CoQ10 to ubiquinol. And as a result, we start to impede various functions that CoQ10 helps with, in particular, in my view, the generation of nitric oxide, which helps improve the health of the glycocalyx. Just
to interrupt for a second, one of the multifaceted nature of this just makes it seem so ridiculous when you go and see a doctor about heart problems or whatever, and they go, just take a statin. It's just your blood pressure. Just take a beta blocker, something like that.
100%, Dave. And that's as I said right at the beginning, it's frustrating to hear that, because the majority of these simple contributors are common. They're common contributors, but we're focusing on one that has very little impact, let alone a primary observation. Yes, insulin is a big one. Smoking, we know, and some of the others. But all of these other things are actually pretty much fixable with lifestyle, right? A statin is not a lifestyle fix. A statin is
right.
a Band-Aid at best, right? And I'm not going to say that there aren't certain situations where maybe, just maybe, the ApoE4 people might need to do something there, but that's not the majority of people. That is absolutely not the majority of people. And most people that I talk to have suffered some form of side effects from them. So yeah, I totally agree, Dave. It's when you look at it like this, and I really thank Patrick for pulling this together. It helps put things in context for us, and as we run around this image, a lot of things start to come to mind, and then the question is, what can we do about it? I suppose that's the next part of the puzzle, isn't it?
So, like, what have you been doing to make sure that your kind of your K's good, your vitamin C level, all of these things are in check?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question, Dave. And there are some tests you can do to identify where some of these at. Now that it's not a direct test of vitamin K, for example. And K plays so many different functions, but it's got a hierarchy of priorities. First is survival, and the survival piece is very much around triaging blood clotting, making sure that the blood can clot when it needs to, and then if there's enough, it will start to cascade into other parts of the functions. One of the lower ranked functions is osteocalcin. Is looking at a carboxylation of osteocalcin. So I'll talk about two pathways in particular. One is the carboxylation of MGP, which is matrix GLA proteins, and the other one is carboxylation of osteocalcin. Now, carboxylation is really the conversion of static proteins into active proteins for these particular cases. Very simplified, but it does take us down a little bit of a point of discussion. So MGP, when MGP is carboxylated, it can then be active in starting to allow the removal of the lipid core out of the calcified or the insult where we've got the problem. And phenyl A helps with that, but you need to have carboxylated MGP to make that happen. That is a lower threshold than the carboxylation of osteocalcin, and osteocalcin takes that calcium and places it in our bones. So calcium, once it's extracted, can either go into our bones or back to the liver for recycling. Phenyl A actually carries that out. But that little rabbit hole there, you need a lot more vitamin K to get to the osteocalcin carboxylation than you do for the MGP. So if you measure your status of osteocalcin, and if that is in the right range, then you know everything below that is okay too. So it's a surrogate marker of your K levels. If your osteocalcin is out of range, then you're probably deficient in vitamin K. Just to simply put it. So it's getting into a little bit of the weeds about what to check and what's the right level to check. So it's very much multifactorial. And what I might do, Dave, is just jump a slide. I want to get to this one here. So what actually happened? Actually, sorry, just bear with me, Dave. I'll just jump back to this one here. So in simple terms, and this is my very simplified version of what I think happens. We get those insults in the arteries, right? Whatever causes them, we've just seen. The body triggers an inflammation response. The macrophages come along to deal with those insults. This is the normal healing process. When things are good, our LDL and HDL carry the toolkit of stuff, all the right goodies to deal with things. And we just talked about vitamin K. We'll talk to the other bits of the toolkit in a sec. But the healing process needs all of these things with them. It's a bit like when a firefighter turns up to a fire, they've got their fire hoses, they've got their engine full of fuel and either an offtake of water, or they bring a truck full of water with them so they can fight the fire. But if that toolkit is incomplete. Imagine the fire truck doesn't actually have the hoses on board because someone forgot to pack them. Then it actually can't fight the fire, and it's possibly not going to achieve the goal of dealing with the macrophages. Our goal with the macrophages is that they come in, they do their job, and then the LDL comes along and gets rid of them. It kills them off, and then it takes them away for recycling. The other part of our problem is when our LDL is unhealthy. We know about small dense LDL and oxidized LDL. When the LDL can't come along and do its thing, imagine the fire truck loses a wheel on the way and can't get there because that maintenance hasn't been done. Then we end up with this problem that we are ineffective in carrying out the task. At that point, there's a couple of different schools of thought, but in essence, the macrophages either overcome the LDLs and just continue then the constant insult and inflammation, and this becomes a vicious cycle. We don't fix it, and that takes us then to the problem that I think we see with the soft plaque, and with time, it gets worse and worse and worse. So as I sort of unpack that a little bit, we go back to this dragon and understand, well, which of these are causing me the insults? Understand that there could be different parts of this, more than one, that are affecting me. So it's getting to the bottom of a test for each one of these and what works and what is okay and other aspects. And I'll get to some tests that I do shortly. So what does the toolkit look like? And the toolkit is a combination of what's on the surface of our LDL and HDL and what is actually traveling in our blood. So thinking back to our discussion previously that our LDL and HDL are actually transport vehicles. They actually transport nutrients inside the core, but also on their surface. So depending on whether they're able to be transported in water or if they're fat soluble, which will determine whether they're transported. But in summary, the things that we would expect to see as a robust toolkit are sufficient D3, sufficient K1, K2, vitamin E, CoQ10, magnesium, and magnesium is usually in the blood itself, phenyl A, the right amount of T3, sufficient vitamin C in its antioxidant, but also in its form to assist with synthesis of repairs to the arteries, microRNA, omega-3, and a few others, but these are probably the key ones. And if you've got any gene mutations and the like, then maybe there's a few others that you might need to account for that may not be naturally occurring. In terms of how they then get transported, if you don't have enough through each of these particular items that come into the body, then the truck is not complete. The fireman hasn't brought his hose along, so they can see the fire, they can prepare for it, but if they haven't got the fire hose to put the fire out, then again we're going to have problems. One of those key ones is the K2, as I mentioned, and again it's on many levels, but each one of these has a role to play. And I had a little bit of a cascade that I jotted down here. So in simple terms, the first question that gets asked, have I got sufficient vitamin D? Then if we are okay there, are the LDL, VLDL, and HDLs properly coated with this toolkit? Have they got enough of the right nutrients? Did we get phenyl A at the right time in the right amounts? This is sort of the little cascade that's happening in the body is how I understand it. Have we got the right levels of free T3? Have we got sufficient magnesium? Do we have an ApoE4 issue? And again, that's a slightly nuanced discussion there. Are our antioxidants available and at the right levels? And do we have the right level of calcium in the body? As noted before, the body prioritizes what we use our nutrients for. So we may be taking some out of our food, but are we getting enough to achieve all the purposes? I read somewhere not long ago that magnesium addresses 300 different functions in the body. So having sufficient magnesium is key to making sure all those functions are functioning properly. If we're only getting a tenth of it, then it will prioritize which ones we get. Once we've got everything there, the body then goes through and deals with the process. Go back to that little sequence diagram I had a second ago. It actually gets us back to this diagram and gets us back to where we need to. But we've got to make sure we get rid of those insults, right? So this is sort of what happens after we find those insults. We want to get out of this range and we want to make sure we're sitting in this space here. I'll just pause there, Dave. Does that prompt any questions or thoughts at the moment?
The fire truck analogy is like it's very, very clear that, like if you don't have the fire hose in the fire truck, you can get to the fire, but you're not going to be able to complete the task.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And as a result of
it's
that,
all these things coming together. Yeah.
exactly, it's literally the tool. That's why I refer to it as a toolkit. It's not just I've got a hammer, I can fix everything. Sometimes you need a spanner, sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a chisel, screwdriver, whatever it happens to be. And the body has its own toolkit that it needs. So the majority of these nutrients we can get from our diet. This is that next step, right? So, first I'll talk about some tests, and then I'll come back to what I do and my approach. So, how did I go about digging this? And I did take a lot of learnings from various authors and presenters, and I've mentioned it previously, but the Linus Pauling work around vitamin C, and he's reversed heart disease in many, many patients using vitamin C, lysine, and proline in looking at synthesis of collagen and arterial repair. Patrick Toit did a fantastic body of work. His website shares all that information. It's there. Read it 1,000 times. Reach out to Patrick. He's been on the show. He didn't necessarily get into a lot of detail on that on the show, but it's definitely there, and he's articulated in simple terms. Watch his videos, and he shares a lot of this. The other one is Malcolm Kendrick's work in particular. He brings a slightly nuanced view. And then, as you saw me flicking through some of those other slides, Vladimir Sabatin around how arterial repair happens. And it's a slightly different approach to what the cholesterol theory talks to, but I think it's got a lot of merit. And again, it doesn't change what we're talking about here, but it just helps explain what's happening in the background. So there's a lot of research out there and studies and books and whatever else that help inform our view, and it's still a hypothesis because I'm not cutting my arteries open to prove this, but it seems to be doing what it's supposed to do. Understanding what those causes of the insults are, and how do you know you've got insults at that point? So one of the first simple tests, and I do this whenever I get bloods done. Obviously, I'll do my full blood counts and look at my red and white blood cells. I look at my white blood cells in particular. I look at my neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, the ALR, and the ratio of those two numbers, the absolute numbers, should be in the range of between 1 and 3. That is a really good, healthy blend. Both of those parts of the blood, for those that aren't aware, they're they're a yin and yang of the immune system. So one attacks the insult and the other one cleans it up, right? So if they're working in harmony, the numbers will be where in that range. If you've got an imbalance, then you'll see a distinct difference there. So that's a simple one that you get out of your blood tests. I usually look at the kidney and liver functions as well, make sure everything's functioning as expected there. Always a bit open-minded, given our carnivore blood results may be slightly different to the general population. So those reference ranges are always potentially suspect. Using the white blood cells, for example, mine are always right at the low end of the reference range at about the 4 or 3.8 and so on. And I remember talking to my GP about that, and he said, I think that's just your normal. He said, if you don't have any inflammation, why would it be elevated? And if you're managing everything, maybe they're dormant, maybe they're not ready, maybe they're getting lazy, but they're at that bottom end. A couple of others I do check is homocysteine. Homocysteine is a good one to keep an eye on, and that will come back to methylation of folate and getting into if you're getting your folate or not. If you've got a gene mutation, I've got MTHFR, sorry, a bit tongue-tied there. I've got MTHFR, so I don't automatically methylate the folate. So I actually do add a supplement, but I could change that with increasing liver intake and so on, right? So there are some opportunities there. So it's about how much you have to take, and some people won't be able to methylate it, so it's about getting it imported at the right level of the cascade. The two other ones are the ESR, erythrocyte sedimentation rate, and the key one, the one that I get done every time, is high sensitivity CRP. C-reactive protein tells us we have inflammation. It doesn't tell us where, but it says, hey, the first traffic light is that there's something there. Then you can dig deeper. So if you didn't do your ESR and your homocysteine, if you did your full bloods, kidney and liver, and your CRP, they're probably the three inflammation ones I would check. And then obviously my normal lipids, I do that anyway. I like to keep an eye on where my trigs and HDL are, as an example. Other tests I've done as I've gone through understanding where I sit, I've looked at my LP little a. I'd monitor my lipids, but also when those lipids are looking a little bit out of range for some reason, and I had this situation last year where I had exercised the night before doing my lipids. So when I did my tests, my numbers were out of whack, and it supported that the body's transporting energy and so on. It hadn't fully recovered from that. I should have waited 2 days before doing those tests. I actually got a subfraction test done a few days later. And the subfraction test then said, okay, pattern A, this. But some of these tests aren't covered by your Medicare, and they cost a bit of money. So you want to do them when you need to, not just do them for the sake of doing them. Right. So there's a little bit of that. The other couple that I did do when I was digging through, as I said, digging into osteocalcin, because there isn't really a test that will measure your vitamin K directly. So doing a test to see the results of what vitamin K will give you as an outcome, which is if that osteocalcin is good, then you know you've got sufficient vitamin K, because that's at the end of the food chain by the time it gets its need. And then any gene mutations that could happen. The one I haven't done is ApoE4. I haven't checked for that. And just based on my lipids, I don't think that's a problem. If I had extended high LDLs, like they've gone up for sure, but it's not to the same scale that the lean mass hyperresponders are seeing, then that could be a factor, but it would have been a factor all along. Okay. So that's a little bit of Will I do it at some point? Maybe. The engineer in me is always interested with data and numbers, so who knows? So that's sort of where that gets us to. I'll segue, if that's okay with you, then into, so what do I do to
Sure.
make sure I'm getting the right bits of the toolkit? Not in any particular order, just how I've got them written down. Vitamin C, I'll just start with that one because that's usually a contentious one. I do supplement vitamin C, but I supplement in the order of grams, right? So I take about 6 grams of vitamin C for 2 reasons. One is the antioxidant nature of it, but the big one is in the synthesis of collagen. Okay, so I'm essentially supersaturating my body with that. In some circles, and this is based on the Linus Pauling work, and he's well published on that. He won Nobel. I think he's the only person who's won a Nobel Peace Prize twice for medical research. Really, really clever guy. Thomas Levi has expanded on that and has got several books on that. Owen Fonaro's book about heart disease and talks to that as well. So there's, again, a lot of literature out there. But vitamin C on its own isn't enough. Vitamin C also needs proline, lysine, and several other nutrients that we get. So for me, I don't supplement proline. Well, I do. I eat meat. There is sufficient proline and lysine in. If you eat half a kilo of red meat a day, you're getting well and truly enough. Okay, so where I can get my nutrition to be provided from my food intake, that is absolutely the priority. So typically my proline and lysine go hand in hand with that vitamin C, and the vitamin C also then helps kill those bad microbes or anything else that might be going on when we've got an infection and the like. In addition to that, I get my K2. Yes, I do take a supplement, and again, the supplement is in milligrams. It works out 25 milligrams of MK4, half a milligram of MK7, and 5 milligrams of K1. Okay, so that's the combination there. Most typical foods are in the micrograms. So if you're having cheese, and I have a lot of blue cheese, I have a lot of brie and camembert and those sorts of things, I get as much as I can from the foods, but I do supplement given my objective. Again, I can't be too dogmatic with some of this. It's like, well, yes, I can rely totally on my food, but then I'm not 100% sure if I'm achieving my desired purpose. Omega-3, I'll have, my goal is to try to get about 3 grams of omega-3 a day. And that I do with a couple of cans of sardines or herring and the like. So I get all my omega-3 from my food. I have read that some fat has got omega-3 in it as well. I can't be assured 100%, but I know I'm getting it from my sardines. I have sardines probably 3 to 5 times a week at lunch, and I actually mix that with some blue cheese to just get an extra whammy. Again, a lot of these are fat-soluble vitamins and nutrients, so having them with something with fat content in your food allows them to be absorbed properly. There's purpose to combining some of these things. CoQ10, I do add that to help with nitric oxide generation, but I also get a lot of CoQ10 out of beef. Is the beef sufficient? Probably, but that's one, again, belts and braces for. If I was sitting at the bottom 5% of the heart scale, then I probably wouldn't bother with the supplements. But with where I am, I didn't
Right.
want to leave anything at risk, right? It's a bit late once you've had a heart attack. So CoQ10 out of beef. Liver is really high in CoQ10. I don't have liver, not because I don't like it, it's just the convenience. So if someone's consuming liver, they're probably getting enough CoQ10. D3, again, when I was in Australia, I wasn't adding D3. Here in the UK, while I'm here, the sun's actually been really good, but I'm indoors most of the day. Most office workers don't get to see much of the sun. it's important to make sure you're getting enough. Sardines have D3, fatty fishes D3, some fat is D3. It is in our food. Is it enough? Again, it's a question. I'm a bit on the fence. While I have been taking some D3, I'm on the fence on whether a synthetic version is as good or doing what I achieve. I'm still using it at the moment while I'm here, but in Oz, being able to get out in the sun was obviously a little bit easier. MTHF, which is methylfolate, as I touched on before, I've got a gene mutation that says I don't break it down as efficiently. If I was eating liver, I'd probably be more than adequate. Eggs do have it, but I'd probably have to consume 10 plus eggs a day to do that. And not that I don't like eggs, I do, but I don't eat 10 eggs a day. I might eat a carton a week, just as an example. So I do take a methylfolate supplement. Folic acid doesn't get broken down, and I think we might have touched on this previously. Part of the challenge with taking folic acid or fortified foods, as we know our foods have been, it means that we don't actually, if you've got this gene mutation, it doesn't actually get broken down. If our folate levels aren't correct, our homocysteine's going up. So it's a bit of a seesaw, yin and yang, with these and various iron absorptions and so on. So getting that part of the system working properly is actually important. A couple of others, vitamin E, which supports a lot of these. You can get your vitamin E from your fish, eggs, chicken. They are lower amounts. So there are a lot of plant foods that actually have vitamin E, but in our space, we're always a bit cautious with the other nasties that come with the plants. So I actually take a clean vitamin E supplement, and it's the tocotrienols that I use. Okay, and I just take that as part of this cargo, making sure I've got the right piece of cargo there. The one other thing I didn't touch on with the vitamin C is it comes up often. What about the oxalates? What about the negative side of oxalates? I actually take all my calcium through my food intake. I don't recommend anyone supplement calcium with a tablet, right? It's highly not recommended. But if you're taking your calcium through your food intake, not only are you ensuring the body will self-regulate what it needs, it also helps bind any of those oxalates that are in the system. Okay, so calcium is a binder for oxalates. So given I'm taking grams, not micrograms or milligrams of vitamin C, I think what's the RDA of vitamin C? 60 milligrams or micrograms or whatever it is. So no way you're going to get the quantity I'm after out of any food. Even if we were frutivores, you would not get enough vitamin C out of your food. So with that in mind, and giving the body the boost, it's putting it on steroids, so to speak, to repair, synthesize collagen and give the repair for the tissue it needs, making sure we're not creating a different problem, and making sure we're addressing those things. So just a little bit of how all these systems work in together. Magnesium, again, I don't think too much needs to be said here. Our soils are deplete in magnesium. Our water is filtered, or it's bottled in God knows what plant, or it comes through a sanitation plant and hit with fluoride and everything else, depending on what you're drinking. So making sure you have enough magnesium in the body is key. And in the order, I think Patrick talks about it on his page, in the order of 1 to 1.3 grams per day, 1,000 to 1,300 milligrams per day. I take two capsules of it, and it probably works out about 800, 700, 800 a day. We do get some out of our food, it's just not enough. So rather than trying to do it all in one hit, and the different types of magnesium depending on what the individual's needs are.
Which one do you take? Because Patrick had been talking about malate being the better one.
Yeah, look, I flex a little bit, and in previous discussions with Patrick, he also highly recommended 3 and 8. 3 and 8 makes it to the brain as well, but malate's the most readily absorbed. If there's sleep issues, or if there's bowel issues, glycinate, citrate, the one I take is a bit of a complex, to be honest with you. I think there's a bit of everything in it. It's probably got a lot of oxide in it, which is not great. Dave, just sort of some of the stuff that's available to me as we go on. But I do have some 3 and 8 here that I haven't tapped into yet. I'm just depleting my other stuff that I've got. But I think if people are taking glycinate, if they're taking citrate, if they're taking, or citrate, if they're taking malate or 3 and 8, they're going to be getting a reasonable amount, as long as they're getting the right dosage. I know I was talking to someone the other day, and they said, "Oh yeah, I'm taking 1 or 2 capsules." I said, "Well, what's the dosage on that?" And it was like 30 or 40 milligrams or whatever it was, and it was like, mine was 350 per tablet. I said, "Well, you're nowhere near enough just in that," because they weren't seeing any results. They said, "I'm taking one of these a day." Yeah, but you've got the wrong dosage. And what I would suggest to people, how did I experiment with this? Again, not medical advice, but how did I experiment with this? You will know through your bathroom movements when you've had too much magnesium, right? And then you just regulate from there. You're not gonna create significant issues if you have too much, other than maybe spending a bit more time in the bathroom than you wanted to. And some people, that's all they're looking for, just a bit more regular. I know other family members were reluctant to add it, and always struggled to go to the bathroom. They upped their intake to, I think, whatever the dosage was, three tablets that they were having, and they're very smooth, very comfortable, no issues, and they're extremely relieved for obvious reasons. Yeah. So I think a little bit of this is, people need to explore for themselves on what they're doing. I am mindful of time, Dave, so I just might pause there if any questions that you want to ask before we move on any further.
The question I had, I'd never heard of Fetouin A before. Where does that come from?
So that's in the body, and what? Let me just quickly, because I did make some notes. Fetouin A is what actually does the moving of the calcium out of the core, right? So just bear with me for a sec. So once we've carboxylated the MGP, that then allows the Fetouin A to remove the calcium from the vascular smooth muscle cells, right, the media layer. So this is where that goes and extracts that, and then it takes the calcium to one of 2 places, either back to the bones or back to the liver. But the Fetouin A can be too high or too low as well. So this is all about getting everything in balance. Measuring Fetouin A is a bit elusive. I think Patrick said he had actually got it done once with a special favor at a test, but he hasn't been able to find a commercially available test. It's a research type test. But it comes back to measuring some of the surrogate markers that tell you, well, because if it's going to get put back into the bone, it'll use the osteocalcin route. If it's going to get put back into the liver, it'll use the hepatic route. So measuring the osteocalcin route for sufficient osteocalcin tells you that those other things are working as well. So it's almost like checking, did we get to the end state? If we did, we're probably okay through the path, rather than having to check all the way along. So it's a little bit of a shortcut, but it's key. It's one of the key aspects. Vitamin K itself, K1, K2, it is not what removes the calcium. People think, oh, it takes calcium. No, it doesn't. It is an enabler. In this model, it enables the removal, and enables through the carboxylation of MGP and osteocalcin. It then allows Fetouin A to do its thing and move it along. It's a cascade of things. Without
Right.
the vitamin K, it becomes a problem.
Thank you.
So they're probably the big chunks there, and again, we could talk for hours and get into many rabbit holes, Dave, I'm sure, and we may do some more of this at a later date. But it's where do people start? I think the first piece I would say to people is go back to the Dragon. The videos here, you can pause on that, have a read of that, and look at each one of those in isolation and start to understand for you as an individual, what is the process to understand that impact. On Patrick's website, k-vitamins.com, it'll be in the show notes, I'm sure. He goes into a lot more detail, and the science and the studies that take you through that. We're talking about K in the context of heart disease, but you'll see on his website there are so many other factors that comes into play. So there's a lot of competing processes for vitamin K. So you've got to make sure that the ones that are important are getting addressed. But each one of those processes on that Dragon, he talks to in his website and helps steer where to start, what to look for. He talks through a whole multitude of other supplements as well. I don't take them. The ones I've talked to are the ones that I do. I did. There are two others I do take, but not necessarily to fix the heart disease. One's nattokinase, and I take that for two reasons. Primary is it's an antithrombotic, so it will assist with if I get a thrombosis occurring, it will help stop that happening. No guarantees, but it helps manage fibrinogen and stuff. There's studies around that. The other one, it's a bonus. It helps break down the spike protein. So it has been recommended as some benefit to people if they're having long COVID and whatever else. So that's just an aside.
Right.
The other one that I take from time to time is dihydroberberine. It's a derived version of berberine itself. Some people have side effects with berberine. Dihydroberberine has shown a lot less side effects. I take that. I take it on and off. I was listening to Dr. Will Davis a few weeks ago, actually, not very long ago, and he promoted the positive effects of it, but he also cautioned prolonged use and its ability to annihilate some gut bacteria. It works because it kills bad bacteria, but that takes out some of the good bacteria as well. So to maybe use it intermittently and the like, but it has shown some really good results in helping with heart disease and calcification.
So, Mick, thank you for coming on and giving us all this information. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way of getting in contact?
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. My contact details can be in the show notes. Put them there, but bouncing me an email. I haven't really worked out how YouTube contacts work so well. Some of the stuff I post gets hidden, and otherwise, I am on the Facebook group, your Facebook group, so people can find me there, ping me a note, post something in there, and tag me by all means, or send me an email to the contact, and more than happy to help. I am currently in the UK time zone, so that works for some and not for others. So just bear with the response. I try to get to things as soon as possible, noting none of it's medical advice. I know, Dave, you say that anyway, but it's maybe a steer on where to look for some things. I don't have all the answers. Some of this is just unpacking it as we go, but it seems to be heading us down the right path, and happy to keep exploring.
Yeah, and yeah, as you say, it's not medical advice, but it's really good to kind of hear about this holistic way of looking at things rather than, as we discussed before, going to the doctor and them going, you need a beta blocker, you need a statin, right?
Absolutely. And there's,
Yeah.
I don't want to go down this rabbit hole here because I don't think we've got the time, but even if you're on a statin, your LDL will go up when you take K2 if you're short, and then it will level out. And the same with HDL. So Patrick talks about that in one of his videos where he actually tested that. He drove his LDL right down to 30 or something with statins. Then he took K2 and it jumped up to 130 or whatever it was, because it's the transport mechanism. It says, oh, now I've got the nutrient I need to deliver, upcycle, upregulate the LDL capacity, even though he had driven it down with the statin. So it's telling you that the body knows what it needs. And I reckon if you saturated yourself with K2, those with excessively high LDL may even see a stabilization now that they've got everything they need. If we can get the
Interesting.
toolkit saturated, then I'd be keen to talk to Dave Feldman about that as part of his studies, but we'll see.
Well, Mick, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Anytime, Dave. Pleasure, as always.